special event in which our keynote speaker, His Excellency Jean-David Levitte, the Ambassador of France to the United States, will speak on the United States and France in a world transformed. You have in your programs the biography of Ambassador Levitte, a very brilliant career in diplomacy. He was named to the United States in December 2002. As a career diplomat, he served, and you saw him often on television at the United Nations during that very intense period of diplomacy on Middle East issues and Iraq, but he was France's permanent representative to the United Nations from 2000 to 2002. He was a Sherpa, diplomatic advisor to French President Jacques Chirac from 1995 to 2000, and joined the Foreign Ministry back in 1970. A young man. I joined the Foreign Service in 1962, so he holds a degree in law and is a graduate of the prestigious Institute of Political Science and the National School of Oriental Languages, where he studied both Chinese and Indonesian. So he is truly a great expert and a man with a brilliant career, and we're very happy to have you here tonight. Mr. Ambassador, I would like to put into some personal context the framework of your remarks to a very interested audience here in Houston and at the Baker Institute. I was recently and often in Washington, and about 10 days ago I was in Washington, and I was taking a morning jog near my hotel, and I was jogging around Lafayette Square. And in jogging around Lafayette Square, I, of course, noticed on one corner facing the White House is Lafayette's statue. On the other corner is Rochambeau, two famous and great French persons who were instrumental in helping the United States in its revolution in 1776. Later, of course, perhaps the single most important commentator on American society, life, and culture was a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, who in the early part of the 19th century wrote Democracy in America, which remains perhaps the most authoritative analysis of American life and culture writ large. There was the Louisiana Purchase. There was World War I and World War II, where the United States and France fought together and were allies in more ways than one. And then there was that famous meeting between President de Gaulle and an emissary that President Kennedy sent during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where during that critical period where we were on the eve of perhaps a nuclear holocaust, General de Gaulle told President Kennedy's emissary, "Tell your young president, France will be with the United States in peace and in war." And then I do remember when my wife and I were assigned to France in Bordeaux as the Consul General, we celebrated in 1976 the 200th anniversary of the American Revolution. And I can't tell you how the French people came out all over the Southwest, in Aquitaine, all over the Southwest in France, Le Pays-Bas, to celebrate the relationship between France and the United States. And this fierté, this pride of having been part of the American Revolution and helping us. And most recently, on 9/11, there was this remarkable manchette, this headline in Le Monde, "Nous sommes tous Américains," we are all Americans. The strong cooperation between our countries on terrorism and other issues. So the question arises, what has gone wrong? And it's a very important question, and that's why we consider it an honor that you have made the trip here to explain to us France's perceptions of your policy. I will be giving you a letter later from Secretary Baker. I just want to read one paragraph of it. It's a personal letter. He regrets greatly. He's disappointed that he could not be here. But let me just read this one paragraph and share it with our audience. It is particularly appropriate this time of tension to address the United States-French relationship. We are fortunate that you are willing to share your views on how best to put that relationship back on the solid and secure basis that it enjoyed through so many years and so many conflicts. On a personal note, I want to welcome you to my hometown, Houston, and tell you how much I enjoyed working with you, and some other comments. So, in all of this, and you will understand this as a career diplomat, we career diplomats, no matter how difficult the situation is, we always try to see the opening. And I can tell you that there is a silver lining here, because if I'm not mistaken, you must be the most senior French official to have gotten this close to Crawford, Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the French ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador and cher Edouard. Thank you for your generous welcome. Marie-Cécile and I are delighted to be tonight in Houston with you in the heart of the New South, where the future of America is built. And delighted also to be at the Baker Institute, which is playing a leading role to provide answers to the most difficult questions of today's world. Thank you for what you read from the letter that Secretary Jim Baker had the courtesy to put in your hands. I had the honor to work with Secretary Baker in 1990 and 91 in a crucial moment when the first Gulf War was being prepared, and when, even more important maybe, Madrid Conference was being prepared. And I must pay tribute to his extraordinary dedication, determination to obtain what was needed, that is, first to build a coalition of all the countries willing to fight this war, and second, to accompany the peace process to Madrid for a breakthrough. And today, I must also pay tribute to his leading role to try to put an end to one of the oldest difficulty that exists in the Maghreb region, that is the Western Sahara issue. But beyond Jim Baker himself, of course, I must recognize and salute Edouard Jerejian. Edouard, you played with Jim Baker the key role. You are probably in this country one of the very few who know exactly what is the Middle East peace process. You've been an ambassador to Syria, to Israel. You devoted most of your diplomatic life to this region, even if you've been, yes, it's true, a wonderful consul general in my country, in Bordeaux, in the heart of the wineland country. But it's not the only French connection that you have. Your wife, Françoise, I don't see her. Oh, yes, she is there. Is your best French connection. Thank you for your presence, Françoise. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be tonight in Houston, yes, to discuss a key question. What went wrong and what can we do? I start with a flashback. On 9/11, I was in my office as the ambassador to the UN in New York on the 44th floor of a magnificent building with a wonderful view on the downtown of Manhattan. And so I saw from my office the destruction of the Twin Towers. And this will remain in my heart for the rest of my life. And when you said, quoting a French paper, that this day, yes, we were all Americans, I was an American. And my first thought was, it's worse than Pearl Harbor. It's worse than Pearl Harbor simply because the heart of America, mainland America, the heart of New York, Manhattan, has been attacked. And those who died, the 3,000 people who died, were not soldiers, they were civilians. And what was the reason for their death? Only being there in these Twin Towers and suffered the most tragedy, the most horrible tragedy. And so I reacted immediately. I was at that time the president of the Security Council of the United Nations, and we were glued with my collaborators to the windows of my office, and we said we have to do something. And so we couldn't call Paris, we couldn't call anybody, but we prepared a draft resolution, and this draft said two things which were two breakthroughs. The first was that such an act of international terror should be considered as an act of war, paving the way to self-defense from the United States towards those who did that. And the second legal breakthrough was that we considered that those who should be punished were not only those who committed these acts, but also those who provided hospitality, trained, equipped, financed the terrorist networks. And this resolution was proposed to my colleagues from the Security Council the very moment the doors of the UN building were reopened on the 12th of September at 10 o'clock in the morning. And the resolution was unanimously adopted at 11 o'clock in the morning, 1 hour later. It shows that sometimes we don't need 8 weeks or 3 weeks to adopt a resolution in the Security Council, because we didn't need instructions from our capitals. We knew what we had to do. And you remember, Edward, that during this war in Afghanistan, which was triggered by these attacks and permitted by the resolution of the Security Council, authorized by the resolution, France was side by side with the United States of America. We had 5,000 soldiers deployed with our aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, with planes side by side with your planes. And as we speak, today we have still hundreds of soldiers deployed in Kabul. And only 2 countries are training the new army of Afghanistan, the United States and France. So when we started the negotiation on Iraq, I knew that it would be difficult. But with my dear colleague John Negroponte, after 8 weeks of hard work, we adopted unanimously again a resolution which was the result of the wonderful speech delivered by President Bush on the 12th of September last year. And thanks to his determination, the whole UN membership was determined to send back the inspectors in Iraq and to impose disarmament to the Iraqi leadership, if possible peacefully, if not by force. So your first question is, what went wrong? How come we were together during this negotiation and then the Council was split? First, you have to know that we are not a pacifist country, and we considered the participation of French troops if the Security Council were to decide decide the use of force. A French general came in Washington to pass the message, and we were considering a very strong participation. So at that moment, that it was mid-December, we were together. In my view, what went wrong is first that everybody was expecting a big mistake from Saddam Hussein. For one good reason, when he had an occasion to make a big mistake, usually you could count on him. He attacked Iran, he attacked Kuwait, he ousted the inspectors, so everybody was pretty confident that he would do it again. Maybe because he was scared to death, he was very cautious this time, no mistakes. The second thing which was expected was what we called the smoking gun. The smoking gun, well, what is it exactly? I participated in Washington in a number of meetings with the CIA, and we were cooperating closely to provide intelligence to the inspectors of the UN so that they would find the arms of mass destruction. Unfortunately, again, no smoking gun. And the third reason to explain what went wrong is maybe the deployment of American troops. We were all in agreement that this deployment was a good idea and even a necessity, because it was good to add to the political pressure on the Iraqi leadership the pressure of the presence around Iraq of all these troops. But then things started to go wrong. How? Well, slowly the build-up went beyond 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. And at that time, maybe because he was scared, Saddam Hussein not only continued to cooperate in a passive way, opening the doors to the inspectors, but he started to accept real disarmament. And you've seen on the screens of your networks the destruction of the missiles Al-Samud II by the Iraqi army at the request of Hans Blix and the inspectors. So for a majority of the members of the Security Council, this was real disarmament. And we said, thank you, President Bush, and thank you for the leadership role of the United States and the presence of its army around Iraq, because it triggers the peaceful disarmament of Iraq. It works. But in Washington, the mood was quite different. And then I heard that a draft resolution was prepared. A draft resolution to authorize the use of force. And upon instruction from my president, President Chirac, I went to the White House and I said, don't table a draft resolution. Because President Bush said time and again that there was no need for a second draft resolution. A second resolution, why? Because on the basis of existing resolution, the view in Washington was that the United States had enough authority to go to war if need be. And so our view in Paris was that if in Washington the decision had been taken to go to war, for us it was a mistake, but at least, let's do what we did in Kosovo when we were under the threat of the vetoes of Russia and China. And we said, let's agree to disagree as gentlemen. And let's not put to a vote a second resolution. We have enough authority to go to war, and we'll be together again with our Russian and Chinese partners after the war to rebuild Kosovo. But unfortunately, this message was not accepted because Tony Blair needed a second resolution. And I said, look, if Tony Blair needs a second resolution and you don't get the 9 votes, it's even worse for Tony Blair. And so, you see, I'm going in the details of this long negotiation to show that we didn't want this fight in the Security Council. It was not necessary in our view. We could have prevented that. It just happened. Now, why were we, and still are, against this war? Well, as I said, with the majority of the members of the Council, we considered that the peaceful disarmament of Iraq was underway, and it worked. Second, we considered that to decide to go to war at that moment was, in terms of international law, to adopt a preemptive principle. It was a war of choice. It was a war of preemption. And in our view, it sets a very dangerous precedent, which has been already mentioned by the Foreign Minister of India. I know that the Consul General of India is with us tonight. And it is true that India has been attacked by Islamist terrorists in Kashmir. And a war of preemption could be a temptation for India against Pakistan. So, for us, what was at stake was really an important question of principle. But beyond that, I published in the New York Times on the 14th of February an op-ed which was called, "On Iraq, a friendly warning from a friend," which underlined that the war could have consequences, long-term consequences, in Iraq, because Iraq is a very difficult country, a violent society with no tradition of democracy. So to rebuild Iraq is certainly a long-term ambition and a very difficult one to implement. Beyond Iraq, we were anticipating difficulties throughout the Arab world because, as we know, the peace process was and still is in a stalemate. And beyond this difficult situation, we were anticipating, and I underlined that in my op-ed in the New York Times mid-February, more recruitment for Al-Qaeda and more terrorist acts in the Middle East and elsewhere. So these were the reasons why we thought it would have been better to continue the peaceful disarmament of Iraq through the UN inspections. Now, the war is over, and as I learned in New York, let's think positive. Let's think positive in Iraq. We have to be together to rebuild Iraq, and I'm delighted with the outcome of the negotiation and the vote which took place on the resolution in the Security Council. You know that this resolution has been adopted with 14 votes in favor, and France was able to vote in favor because there was flexibility and goodwill on both sides. And this time, we are together and we are looking to the future together. But beyond Iraq, let's not forget what we have to do together as true friends. When I presented my credentials to President Bush on the 9th of December, he said that he personally considers that France is the best ally of the United States in the fight against terror And for one good reason, we have suffered a lot from Islamist terror, from Al-Qaeda in France, and we have a lot of experience to share. And we share all our intelligence with the CIA, the FBI, and the different American agencies. It goes without saying, as true friends and true partners, if we don't succeed together, we will lose, you and us. We have to fight this war against terror together, and we have to eradicate the scourge of terror together. We are together in Afghanistan. We have exactly the same view on North Korea. We share the same analysis with the United States on the Middle East peace process. We are together in the Quartet, and so on and so forth. Let me say one word now about the transatlantic relations, because I read in the papers that it's been damaged by what happened in New York on Iraq. I'm optimistic about the transatlantic relations for one or two good reasons. Together, we represent the two pillars of the world democracies. We share the same values, and if we want to spread these values throughout the world, starting with Iraq, but if possible beyond Iraq, it goes without saying that we have to do it together. And we are also together the two pillars of the world economy. The United States and the European Union together represent 62% of the world GDP, 62%. And each day you have $3 billion of goods, services and investments crossing the Atlantic both ways, $3 billion a day. But at the same time, we must recognize that we represent only 11% of the world population. 5% for the United States and 6% for the European Union. So if we are not together, we will do and achieve nothing. If we are together, then we are really the engine of the world, and that's exactly what we will do, I hope, when our leaders will meet in a few days' time in Evian, France, for the G8 summit. I read from time to time in the press that, yes, okay, maybe, but France is determined to destroy NATO, to curb American power, and so on and so forth. This is simply not true. About NATO. I was the diplomatic advisor, as Edward said, for 5 years of President Chirac, and his first initiative as a Gaullist president was to start a negotiation to have France again as a full member of NATO. And we nearly succeeded. And you have to know that today, as we speak, France is the #1 contributor of troops to NATO operations. Before the US, before the UK, before Germany or Italy or Spain. We are not against NATO. We are in favor of a strong transatlantic bond of friendship and security. NATO will remain the cornerstone of France's security. But we think that we must do better to build European defense. What is the problem? It's not too much military might on this side of the Atlantic. In the dangerous world where we are, we need a strong military power in the United States. The problem is that in Europe, we don't do enough for our defense. We must put more money, and that's what France will do together with the UK, and we must integrate better our forces. I read in the press from time to time that, yes, okay, maybe, but, you know, France is in favor of a multipolar world. That's the proof that France is against the United States. Not at all. Let me take as mine the analysis of Professor Joe Nye. He says that in economic terms, the world is already a multipolar world. You have the United States, you have the European Union as a pole, but you have also Japan, China emerging, maybe tomorrow India, maybe tomorrow Brazil. It works. It works. And I said that the transatlantic relation is a wonderful proof that you can have two poles working together side by side for the better. In military terms, the world is unipolar. We all know that, and it will remain so for a very long period. And the ambition of the European Union is certainly not to compete with the United States. What we want to do is to be in a position to solve the problem of Europe next door, like we should have done for Bosnia and Kosovo. When you think that the Europeans were not in a position to solve Bosnia and Kosovo alone without the United States, it's a pity. And it's not a normal situation. We have to do better for the European defense. So I think that we can be optimistic about the future of the transatlantic relations. The basis is sound, and the determination to stay together is there. One word in conclusion about the French-American relations. Edouard mentioned the statues of Lafayette and Rochambeau. I can confirm they still are in Lafayette Square. And we have no plan, and I don't think the U.S. administration has any plan to withdraw them. And yes, we will never forget that the U.S. saved us twice last century. And on the eve of this Memorial Day weekend, and few days before the 6th of June, D-Day for all the French people, let me say from the bottom of my heart, America, thank you. If we are a free people, it's thanks to you. Thanks to all those who sacrificed their lives for the freedom of the French people, for the freedom of Europe. We will never forget. And you wanted French people to be free. Well, we are a free people, and when we disagree as true friends, we say loud and clear that we disagree. That's the life of democracies. Is it a crime? I don't think so. I think that on Iraq, yes, we disagreed strongly, and I must recognize that France has a special talent to be very visible in the way we express our disagreement. But thank God we were not alone. In the Security Council, 11 members out of 15 were sharing our view. And all over the world, a number of countries expressed the same disagreement. But yes, I must recognize that we said it maybe a bit too much, loud and clear. But let's think about the future. Let's think about what we have to do. You have to know that President Bush and President Chirac were on the phone again today. It was a very positive conversation. They prepared together Evian, where they will meet in a few days' time. And on that basis, I think that the mood will be more positive. I hope that together they will decide to turn this bitter page of the last few months, and that, yes, our friendship will be there as it should be. Thank you very much.
Take some questions.
The ambassador has very graciously accepted to take some questions. We have about 100 questions here. I'll try to do my best in consolidating them. But before I do that, I would like to give a gift to your charming and lovely wife as a token of your visit. A lot of tough questions.
I hope.
There are several questions that have really pervaded the French position and the perception of the French position in this country, and are reflected in questions we have from our audience. And it really goes on the commercial and economic interests of France in Iraq, and how much this has influenced France's position opposing going to war, given its contractual relations and economic commercial relations with Iraq.
Well, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to give you some figures, because I read in the press quite often that, yes, France was interested in maintaining its commercial trade with Iraq. You have to know that for France, Iraq is certainly not a major partner. The U.S. certainly is a major economic partner, but certainly not Iraq. We are not the first partner of Iraq. Before the war, we were not the second or the third partner of Iraq. If you look at the figures, either from the UN statistic or from the IMF statistic, you will discover, maybe with surprise, that France was before the war the 13th economic partner of Iraq. And Iraq represents for our trade 0.2% of our trade, 0.2%. Now, you may say, yes, but there is oil. Okay, let's look at the figures on oil. Our imports of Iraqi oil represented only 8% of the Iraqi oil exports. And if you compare with what the US imported before the war from Iraq, it represented 56% of the Iraqi exports, oil exports. So by far, the US was the #1 importer of Iraqi oil exports, and we were probably the #9 or 10, it depended, with only 8% of the Iraqi exports. So I could continue with this list, but I think I'll stop at that, because it is unfair to say that France is interested only with economic interest. And it was a question of principle. It was a question of international law. It was a question of peace and war, and not a question of oil. We don't consider that if this war took place, it was because of Iraqi oil, and we don't accuse the United States of being interested in Iraqi oil. I think that if the United States went to war, it's because of your judgment on the security of the United States. We disagreed also on this issue because we didn't see any imminent threat for the security of France or European countries. We have never seen any evidence of any connection between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. We didn't see the imminent threat of the use of arms of mass destruction. But we respect the decision of President Bush. He is the one who decides where is the threat for the American people. And we have never said that this war in Iraq was a war about oil. So please don't say that our position was because of oil. And by the way, if we were interested in the Iraqi oil, don't you think that we would have jumped in the bandwagon of war to participate in the reconstruction of Iraq?
There are many questions that we've received on France's role in the post-conflict situation in Iraq and the reconstruction of Iraq, and whether or not France should have a role, not have a role, because of its stance on the war itself. But one question that recurs is, what is France's policy and proposal toward rebuilding Iraq? What would your government want to do in Iraq at this point?
The question has been solved.
This is from a student, by the way, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. The question has been solved through the negotiation which has just been concluded in the Security Council. The first draft resolution, which was proposed by the U.S. government, in our view, didn't give enough role to the United Nations. But there was a good negotiation, and now we have a good balance. And the UN and all the membership of the UN will be in a position to play a role. It's very important. It's important not to give the impression that, in a way, the US and the UK are alone to rebuild Iraq. It's good, much better, to have the whole international community involved. And that's exactly what we have decided when we adopted the resolution. But beyond that, let me stress that, in our view, the reconstruction of Iraq is not a pie to be shared. It's a huge burden. It's a huge burden. And I would say that the choice is yours, in a way. Do you want to have the taxpayers in this country to pay for the reconstruction of Iraq, or do you want to have the international community to participate? Nobody knows exactly how much it will cost, but probably it will be between $10 and $20 billion a year for many, many years. So the question is, who will pay? And we are ready to participate.
Thank you. Several questions on what you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, on the next G8 meeting in Evian. Do you believe President Bush will take advantage of the next G8 meeting in Evian to face the cameras with Chirac, Putin, and Schroeder, and to let the world know we need to put our relations back on the track? A question on the same subject from a different point of view. An English newspaper, The Telegraph, repeated today that President Chirac was going to ambush President Bush at the G8 meeting. And do you think this is going to be confrontational, or do you think this will be reconciliation?
As the French ambassador to the U.S., no doubt, but I hope that it will be a moment of reconciliation. And that's exactly what we want in Paris. In fact, there's been a number of contacts at different levels, and the mood in Paris is, let's turn this bitter page. We have better things to do than to continue to argue about what happened in the past. Let's think positive, as I said. Let's focus on the challenges which are in front of us. And when we see the resurgence of Al-Qaeda today, it's quite obvious that our number one priority is to fight together, to crush these networks, and to do whatever possible to bring peace to the Middle East, to rebuild Iraq, yes, but also to give a boost to the peace process, and beyond. And that will be the key message from the G8 in Evian, to give a boost to the world economy, because in this country the economy is simply flat, and that's the same situation in Europe, in Japan, and so we have also to join forces to send the world a very simple message. We want to give a boost to the economy, the world economy. We want to see growth back in the US, in Europe, in Japan, if possible, in 2003. So that's the spirit with which President Chirac will greet President Bush.
Ambassador, how do you reconcile France's very activist military role in Africa with its stance against the war in Iraq?
As I said, France is not a pacifist country. We've decided to put a lot more money in our defense. We've decided to do whatever possible to build a stronger European defense within the context of a transformed NATO. We have troops in Afghanistan, we have troops in Bosnia, in Kosovo, we have troops in different places in Africa. And you have to know that today we work hand in hand with the United States to try to bring back peace in Côte d'Ivoire. And we don't want to do it alone. We have 4,000 troops in Côte d'Ivoire, in the Ivory Coast, but we wanted to have the backing of the UN, and already 3 resolutions have been adopted by the Security Council to endorse our effort. And we wanted also to have African troops with us. And we have now a number of African countries from the ECOWAS organization, the regional organization of West Africa, working hand in hand with us to support the peace process in Ivory Coast. And I must pay tribute to the wonderful American support that we have received since the beginning of the difficult days in Ivory Coast when there was a coup attempted against an elected president, President Gbagbo. It's another good example of a wonderful partnership between the United States and France.
The French Foreign Ministry has issued a statement about false information being circulated in the United States media regarding France, and you, of course, have made statements and written an op-ed. Would you like to comment on this press play?
Yes, we are 2 old democracies, and in democracies, it's very important to have a lively debate. As I said, we disagreed, and we disagreed in strong terms. But what is important also is to maintain a fair debate. And that's where I had a problem. Because time and again I saw repeatedly printed in the American media a number of so-called information which was simply lies. The last one was that France had provided passports to the Iraqi leadership to help them flee Iraq at the very moment the regime was crumbling. It's so obvious that it is a lie that we thought maybe it's not necessary to deny it. But we immediately denied it because when it is on the TV networks, millions of Americans think it's true. And we were accused also to have maintained in France stocks of smallpox, as if we wanted to use bioterror to do what? We were accused to have provided arms to Iraq at the very moment the war was starting. This is simply a lie. And the problem was also that these lies were printed on the basis of information provided by anonymous sources within the U.S. administration. And all this contributed a lot to the destruction of the image of my country. And it created a lot of anxiety among the 300,000 French living in this country. And so it was important, yes, for the future of our friendship to say quite clearly that we may disagree as friends, but France cannot accept to see its image destroyed by snipers providing false information to the media. Because not only it destroys the image of France, but it fuels in France anti-American feelings. Because you have in the French press a lot of articles about this disinformation campaign. And so we were in a kind of vicious circle. So yes, I took the unusual initiative to send to roughly 200 senators and congressmen and journalists my letter with 8 specific examples of lies, with my denials which were not taken into account. And my hope is that this campaign from some snipers will stop. If it doesn't stop, my hope is that the newspapers will be very cautious next time before they print these lies, and they will give us the opportunity to tell them what we think about these so-quote informations, unquote. And beyond that, I must say that a number of senators and congressmen told me, you've been right to defend the image of France. But now you should do even more, and you should explain what France is doing with the United States in positive terms. And that's exactly what I'm doing tonight. That's exactly what I'll continue to do in Washington and throughout the United States, because our friendship is a treasure, and it must be protected, it must be preserved, it must be enhanced.
2 more questions. This is interesting. It has nothing to do with Iraq, but I've gotten several questions here from students and others on genetically modified foods and France's position on banning genetically modified food. So can you explain the position of France on what I have here in front of me, GM food?
Yes, what we call in Europe, not only in France, Frankenstein food. In fact, you have to know that French people have a kind of religious link with what they eat. And when they are scared by what they see in their plates, it's a national tragedy. And that's the experience we had. 2 times in the past few years. First, we had the contaminated blood scandal in France, where a number of people, thousands and thousands of people, got AIDS through injection of contaminated blood. And it was a national tragedy for the French people. Thousands of people died in France because of that. And the second tragedy was not French, it was a European tragedy, and it was more a British tragedy than a French tragedy. It's the mad cow disease. You have to know that throughout Europe it was a disaster. Millions of cows have been exterminated because of this dangerous disease. And probably hundreds of thousands of people will die in the United Kingdom, in France, in years, because we got this disease. And we don't know if we have it or not, because it will take years before we know, we are sure. So we had to be very cautious when we discussed GMO food. Not because we are suspicious, but simply because if we try to impose genetically modified food, despite the reluctance of European consumers to absorb it, we will simply fail. If our European leaders, Tony Blair or Jacques Chirac or Schröder, were to decide we will now eat GMO food, people would simply refuse. So what we have to do is first to ask the scientists their view about this matter. And that's exactly what our National Scientific Academy did. And it was positive. Done. Second, what we have to do is what we call traceability and labeling. And if we do it, then I'm pretty confident that in a few months' time, the moratorium that has been decided by the European Commission will be lifted, and that people slowly will accept to eat GMO food as you do, as I do in the United States, and I survived. And we will all survive, and the Europeans will survive. But we have to rebuild confidence in what we eat. It was destroyed. It's a slow process because what is at stake is the psychology of not only the French people, but European people.
Last question. Speaking of genetically modified food, what are the geopolitical and the strategic implications for France of French fries becoming freedom fries in this country?
Well, as you all know, first, les frites are a Belgian recipe. And second, these fries come from Idaho State. and they are simply delicious. And these days, I only drink Coca-Cola to show that I'm not boycotting American products. And by the way, do you know that Evian water is distributed throughout the United States by Coca-Cola? It shows simply that boycott has simply no meaning in an economy which is absolutely intertwined. The French economy and the American economy are intertwined. You cannot boycott French products without destroying American jobs. And in France, we cannot boycott American products without destroying French jobs. That's as simple as that.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for an excellent presentation of your government.